Well, thanks for joining me. My name is Brett Nelson. I work for Pitney Bowes. I'm a SaaS platform architect, and I want to talk to you a little bit about today about how Sumo Logic was so central to the digital transformation that we undertook as we moved over the past 3.5, 4 years from on-premise to cloud delivery for our software platforms that we offer our customers. So in addition to being an IT professional, I'm a bit of a word nerd, and we in this room and in this conference sort of speak a different language. I've wandered around the hotel a bit and I noticed there's a Visa conference. I think yesterday there was a BMW conference going on. If you were to go into those rooms, they would probably be saying things that we wouldn't fully understand unless it's a BMW IT conference or a Visa IT conference. But the same goes for us here, right? We speak a different language when you work in IT. And right about the time Sumo Logic came to speak to Pitney Bowes and asked for customer experience interviews, it's a true story. I had just gotten off a meeting where one of my colleagues was talking to a team who wanted to bring their software onto what I do, which is the Commerce Cloud. And the way he put it to that customer or internal customer was, "Are you Sumo'd?" And the guy didn't pause a beat. He was like, "Yeah, we're good. We're logging to Sumo. We're in this account. We're in that account." And I was like, oh, so Sumo at Pitney Bowes has officially become a verb. And as far as speaking a different language goes, right after I learned that I was going to come speak at this conference, I was sitting at the dinner table and I have 3 children and a wife who's a nurse practitioner. So every once in a while I say things that get taken out of context. And I told my family, I said, hey, I get to go speak at the Sumo conference. And they were like, they looked at me a little bit. My 13-year-old daughter says, that's great, Dad. You seem very happy about that, so I'm happy for you. Do you think that means that you might want to go on a diet? And I was like, oh, okay, you don't understand. So then you start to explain what it means to them, and then their eyes just glaze over, right? You've lost them at that point. And once you get in the explanation of your IT lexicon to somebody who's not in IT, you might as well just give up. But one last kind of funny story. 2 years ago, I was coming to a puppet conference. And so I was telling my wife this. I think I was washing dishes and she was clearing the table or something. And I said, oh, my funding came through for the training. I'm very excited to go out to San Francisco, go to the puppet conference. And I just kept doing what I was doing until you feel those eyes on you. And I look over and she's like, you're going where? And she just had no idea, right? It's a completely different thing. You say the word puppet to the people in this room, of course they know exactly what you're talking about. Nobody pictures a marionette, right, when you say the word puppet to people in this room. So, who am I? What do we do? Being a platform architect for the Commerce Cloud organization in Pitney Bowes means a different thing every day of the week. What it came to mean in 2015, 2016 was that I was helping multiple organizations at a time take their on-premise or their data center software and move it into the cloud. What it's meant over the past year and a half, in 2018 and 2017, is I've taken software and helped them integrate into the Commerce Cloud. So as you can imagine, if you're an application and you need to onboard your customers, you need to bill your customers, you need to live in this system, you need this piece of customer data to be in that system, it can become a complex web. And the reason I put this horrible diagram on the board behind me is to give you a sense for how complex that web can be. This is all based off of one API that we host in the Commerce Cloud, which is effectively create user. So that create user API can touch up to 18 different back office systems in order to enable that customer to be everywhere he needs to be so that Pitney Bowes can serve him and take their money and move forward. So clearly, when you're working with systems that are that complex and span that many different back-end systems, it doesn't work to have one system be on Splunk, one system be on Azure, one on AWS, Logstash, Sumo Logic, etc. So that brought us to a nexus point at Pitney Bowes where we had to make choices. We needed to engage our vendors and take our choices down. And we made the same choices that everyone else makes when they're going from multiple vendors to less vendors, right? You're interested in ease of use, you're interested in cost, and you're interested in the existing and the potential further relationship with that vendor. So as we began to evaluate the potential vendors for log aggregation, I was one of the early proponents of Sumo. I wasn't the first, but I really liked my relationship with Sumo Logic at the time. I liked the fact that when I had an idea, I could either see if that idea existed or bump it on the list of their backlog items. And when you do that and 6 months later your idea becomes a release for your vendor, that's a very nice place to be in. So we made the choices. Clearly we went with Sumo Logic, otherwise I wouldn't be here. AWS became our cloud vendor of choice at Pitney Bowes. At that same time, as we began to transform the company, DevOps became, the new buzzword, as it did in so many places, right? You can see many of these tools that probably many of you also use in-house, or maybe you work for one of these other companies today. We began to take seriously system reliability engineering. We began to introduce pods across teams. And as we did that, we have the same goals that everybody does when they want to, decouple their stacks and modernize their IT infrastructure. We wanted MTTR to be as low as possible. We wanted our SLA performance to be 100% where possible, 4 nines if not 100, and speed up the cycle time. And we wanted to enable our teams to deliver their software quicker. So I break that down into how we did that into 3 phases for you today. There's the first phase where things are kind of ugly, you're just getting started, you have that mishmash of vendors, you have the mishmash of deliverables, and you're not really understanding where it all converges. And then there's phase 2 where people begin to understand, and in that phase I talk about how creating a clear understanding of log aggregation led us to effectively rewrite logging standards at my company for software delivery. And then phase 3, best practices are all in play, everybody's happy in theory, and things begin to move a lot quicker. Your delivery times go way down. So phase 1, when we began to bring more than one team onto Sumo Logic and began to log aggregate, we began to see that when you say traverse that big nasty diagram I put up there at the beginning of the presentation, when your standard does not meet the other standard, does not meet the other standard, you run into some issues. And in this phase, basically we were performing, various teams were performing lift and shifts, right? We were taking things out of local data centers. I personally shut down 3 data centers based in Austin, Texas. Data centers shut down all over the world. And as these applications moved to Amazon, it almost became this competition, like how quickly, right, can we go to the cloud? How quickly can we get there? And we did what so many teams did at the time. We introduced Sumo Logic, and we used the local configuration agents, the local conf files. I began to be an expert at constructing, Etsy Sumo Conf, restarting that thing whenever somebody introduced a new log file. But it became part of the standard AMI image that various software platforms offered. And there's pluses and minuses to being at that spot, right? It's not very agile, but it did allow us to at least standardize on AMIs for specific software delivery. And then when we made changes to the software, you're already in there, you're already touching the AMI. Maybe you've got a new source, so you modify your Sumo Conf, you modify the AMI once, and then you create a platform where you can automatically scale based upon the AMI that sits behind whatever software you're delivering. So early adoption phase, you guys have all seen this conf file or some variation of it straight from the Sumo website. What this led us to is that now all the varying software teams begin to understand search. And I begin to spend less time showing people how to write underscore source category equals X, and more time enabling them to handle their own searches, schedule their searches, get alerts, understand what's going wrong as they begin to develop their software in the cloud. And then their eyes begin to open a little bit around, okay, it doesn't make any sense for me to have this format and for this team to have that format, because now my search doesn't work across system and I need to trace that transaction, right? This all comes down to tracing the customer experience from ease of use on the front side into getting back into all those back-end systems like I mentioned earlier. So up here I have highlighted in red a transaction ID, right? And this led us to the realization that when a customer user journey can traverse up to 15, 16 APIs just upon getting created, not to mention using an API or buying an API and transacting with your system to make your company money, you desperately need a transaction ID that is across the systems. So upon this realization, we got together as kind of multiple teams, and we came up with some standards that we wanted to introduce. So we used some Confluence tools in-house to kind of publish these things, and we said, okay, if you're going to be a web or mobile-based application and you're integrated with the Commerce Cloud, or even if you're not, you need to use certain standards when you create your logs. Developers, engineers don't always like to be told what they should do when they do logging, but honestly what we found was that teams don't necessarily want to spend all their time worrying about their log format. They would rather introduce new features. They would rather be more agile. They would rather release more frequently than worrying about something like this. So when we published the standard, we got wide adoption. These are the things that we wanted to focus on: key value pairs, human readable, unique transaction IDs, so that we could then trace the transaction from system to system. JSON became the standard that we use at Pitney Bowes. It makes sense for all those categories. And my own team would, we would come to an issue, right? And I was kind of managing this developer portal experience. And we would come to an issue, and I would say, hey, we have a problem, because my boss is telling me, hey, we have a problem from a Sumo dashboard. And I would say, hey, team, what's the deal here? We got a problem. And I don't see it. There's no JSON log in Sumo when I search for this customer experience. Where is it? Oh, that API call isn't JSON logged in Sumo. And that became a conversation that they did not like to have with me, because my view was, if I don't have a JSON version of it in my Sumo log, then I lose my ability, I lose my credibility with other teams in telling them, hey, we think we have a problem, we don't think it's us, here's why. So I had to go to other sources. Luckily for me, they were all in Sumo, they were easy to get to, and I could find them. But very quickly we learned that every dependency, every API call that we made in and out of the developer portal needed to be JSON logged. It needed to sit in that system as we saw it and were able to search for it. So as we take these monolithic structures and bring them to the AWS cloud, a common next phase is decoupling, right? You want to create smaller microservices, you want to deliver them faster, and in order to deliver things faster, it just makes sense to use some of the existing infrastructure on Amazon. One of the tools that we used widely at Pitney Bowes for a long time, we're just now sort of transitioning away from it, but we use Elastic Beanstalk to deliver quite a few of our applications for the Commerce Cloud and some other teams as well on our API delivery platform. So when you use Elastic Beanstalk, we use a combination of JSON, or Jenkins, Ansible, Beanstalk, Sumo Logic. And the two file formats that I have up here behind you, if you've ever used Elastic Beanstalk, they're very familiar to you, right? This gives us the capability to take 2 or 3 files, format those files in a specific way, and enables us to use those files across as many environments as we need. So it works on dev, it works on staging, it works on UAT. Some companies call these environments different things: sandbox, pre-prod, production. You take the only changes that you need to change environments there, remove it out to an environment variable in, say, your YAML file that corresponds to that environment, and now you're logging everywhere. It's the same everywhere, and you can easily release your software in a nice automated fashion using the tool set that we have up here. There are other tools that do it equally as well. This is the tool set that we standardize on. So as we get to this place where you're now releasing software in a more agile fashion, your CI/CD is beginning to mature, then you get to the place where a tool like Sumo Logic really shines and shows its value. And the next quote I have is from my manager of the Commerce Cloud. He's a director of the Commerce Cloud platform. He uses it on a daily basis, right? I've seen teams take it and put their Sumo dashboards up on those monitors in the hallway, right? So they can see what's going on at the core of their application. So when I get a hip chat from Kyle, it almost always starts with, hey, good morning. I'm like, oh, here we go. So I'm loading dashboards in my browser as soon as Kyle says hi, good morning to me, right? I'm like, what's going on? There's something going on. There's got to be something going on. And it's usually, sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's not, but he's usually found his answer because of a very nice search created dashboard that he's created himself in Sumo Logic. So that's always a double-edged sword. Once the higher levels of your organization get good at dashboarding, they're going to come back to you with questions very quickly. So now we have integrated the knock into some of the Sumo Logic stuff, right? It used to be that the knock was very much driven by external monitoring tools, right? Like Dynatrace or Site 24/7, where they're out there and they're pinging your website and they're trying to figure out, hey, are you up, are you down, what's going on? The negative to that model that we quickly learned was that, and I was just speaking with a colleague about this earlier this morning, is that somebody cuts a cable in New York City and your knock dashboard is showing you as being 8% down, but your site is fully up. That's not, you don't want to be on the mat for that, right? You don't want to be called out for that. So we've begun to use Sumo Logic as our source of truth for whether or not we're up or down in the varying web applications. And how we've done that is we've taken, okay, you can measure availability, and that's one thing, from around the world and around the globe and around the country. But what Sumo gives you the ability to do is take your application and say, how did you respond to every request that made it to you, right? If it made it to you, then you want to know that your application did everything expected of it and more. So I just took a couple panels from the dashboard that a few of the executives use in the engineering organization. This is on our login service. Our login service currently fronts 50 some odd applications for Pitney Bowes. So as you can imagine, that's a pretty important application. If login service goes down, it's basically the front door to revenue for us on all these applications. So we've created some nice dashboards around the login service. This one shows login success down here combined with errors, right? Like which software product is experiencing an error. And then there's another panel that I didn't take over here, but exactly what those errors are. And for a while, I was in charge of the sign-up application. Again, an important application. If your customers can't perform self-sign-up, then you're losing money, right? So this is where my manager would come to me. Hey, you got a 404 in sign-up. What's going on there? Or you got a 400 from provisioning. We've supposedly constructed sign-up in such a fashion that no bad data can make it through the front door. So how did you get a 400 from the API you're calling to provision your customer if you've constructed sign up correctly? Now, he actually had a bad Sumo search in that case, and I was off the hook. Another application that's very important to Pitney Bowes we released in the last couple of years is SendPro. It's like a desktop and mobile-based shipping application where you can ship FedEx, USPS, UPS. SendPro runs something like 26 different Beanstalk or Docker-based applications in AWS in order to create the application that our end users see, right? We're dealing with APIs from all those vendors I just spoke about. We're dealing with all the provisioning APIs on the back end. Again, perfect place to put all this data in one place and bring that data to the viewpoint of, I actually went in and was searching for some of the more important dashboards that I found. As an admin, you get to see them all in Sumo Logic, and this was one of our business leaders who kind of spans the engineering business fence for this particular application. Very important guy. His personal dashboard had 13 panels on it, telling him everything he needed to know about the reliability of SendPro, whether or not it was having a problem with a FedEx API, whether or not it had a problem with a Commerce Cloud API that's important to me. And then these 4 that I took, which are obviously very important panels. How many self-service people are signing up, some geo-based information, whether or not they're getting 400s or 200s from different geographies, new customers, just like how the signups are going, error tracking. What kind of errors are we getting? It's probably hard to see there. These different colors are 202s, 500s, 504s, 400s. You've seen these panels a lot this week. There's no big surprise to what we're doing with it. So logging begets logging. Right? This is the slide that all the Sumo people here love, and everybody else is kind of like, oh yeah, same thing for me. what we've tried to do, because we had so many disparate divisions at Pitney Bowes, we had so many different accounts going on at one time that we saw this and we needed to work with Sumo to say, hey, we got to cut this down. I can only administer so many accounts. It's just kind of becoming silly. So we've since cut that down to what we call non-prod and prod. And you can see non-prod kind of slowly growing towards the 50 gigabyte a day. You can see prod spiking way up every once in a while, but sort of generally climbing to the 50 gigabyte ingestion per day. So what I want to see as a Sumo administrator and as a DevOps, person in my organization is some of these spikes are okay, right? It's okay to spike on Black Friday and see a large log ingestion, and Sumo will deal with you on that, right? They'll average your usage out. You aren't going to get, I don't think, massively financially hit for those spikes, but what I would like to see is I'd like to see a little bit less of these spikes, because some of these spikes happen because when teams come on board to a logging aggregator, they might have forgotten to, move, from info to warning or whatever and how they're logging. So as an administrator and somebody who's constantly looking at this, you want to help them get better at logging the correct stuff in the correct place so that they can use that data effectively. So I would like to see some less spikes. I'm fine with the growth pattern. I would like to see less spikes as we move forward. So how do you do that? Right, and this takes me to kind of phase 3, and I'll be honest, this phase 3, this best practices, we helped write those best practices, but we have other divisions in the company who are doing even newer, cooler stuff than we're doing, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that use case, which I just thought was really neat. We have a DevOps Roundtable that we do once a month, where a team that has done something kind of neat and kind of forward-leaning will come on and they'll educate other teams at Pitney Bowes, which is just a fantastic thing, right? Because you can have these bright spots in your organization, and if you don't get the word out there, it's great that they're advancing, but it doesn't help the rest of the company, and you want advancements to help your whole company. So the reason I took that and presented this here was that I thought what they did was really neat. So again, there's Jenkins, Ansible, Docker, and now they've kind of matured from the Beanstalk model over to ECS, right? So we're using a complete Dockerized solution in our cross-border system now, and of course Sumo Logic is ingrained there. So what they do is, using Gluster and using ECS, they've taken their many applications that make up cross-border shipping and cross-border payments in our border-free organization, and they said, okay, we're going to do logging dynamically across these solutions. So when we introduce a new software solution, it's going to be Dockerized, that's going to go on here. If we standardize the Docker container and we take the Sumo Logic collector and we pull it out into what they call like a little sidecar container, then the development teams have to know 2 bits of information. They need to know what to call their log files, and they need to know where to put their log file in their Docker container. That's it. What they put in that log file, how they use it doesn't matter. So that enables your development team to really kind of move quickly, right? They don't need to think about this stuff at all. So as we introduce a new container with a new software solution in it, this solution that they've built goes out and dynamically traverses the tree for the log file. It discovers any new applications. It discovers whether or not it's a sandbox application or a production application, and it discovers the data that's built into the log file. Automatically, it rewrites the JSON for the collector to include that, and the cool part is when you do that, when you rewrite that JSON file for the collector, then the collector automatically restarts, and that data immediately goes into Sumo Logic. So they roll a new software product out, no buttons to push, no IT person to contact, bam, 5 minutes later, their data has begun appearing in Sumo. And then, as I mentioned earlier with the spikes, right? Ideally, you'd like to see a little bit of a nicer pattern as your Sumo Logic data grows. So what they built in, which was kind of a cool thing, was they built in an override into their GitLab. So the operations people have what's called an override file, and they built that into pipeline, into Docker, and they publish that to S3, and the collector runs a script every minute to go double check that S3 bucket to make sure that its overrides file is current. And so when you see a spike where somebody is logging too much information, it happens all the time, right? Somebody's logging too much or overlogging, you don't necessarily want to pay for their mistake for very long. So IT, who's keeping their eyes on the Sumo Logic, usage and application growth, can say, you know what, I'm going to override this guy, even though he's allowed to do that. I'm just going to put a quick override in there. My Sumo Logic ingest will, stop spiking at the moment. That'll give me the time I need to go talk to him to say, hey, maybe think about, the level you're logging at, or is everything that you're logging absolutely necessary to go into your logging aggregation tool? They also created a format so that they can, if they do want logs that they know don't need to go to Sumo, they just call them a .local or a .no-log file. So they get written into the application container, but they never go to Sumo Logic based upon what's built into the conf file for Sumo Logic. So that brings me to near the end of the presentation. I want to go back and just say a few things. How we use Sumo Logic at Pitney Bowes really depends where you are. So its use in dev is irrefutable, right? You aggregate your logs, you track your errors. Its use in coordination during integration is just so key, especially when you're talking about bringing an application into the Commerce Cloud where your interaction with other systems becomes very complicated. I won't say complex. It becomes complicated when you begin to bring a solution into the Commerce Cloud and need to touch so many other back-end systems. And then, of course, the dashboarding, which everybody's showing you this week, right? It's just so important to take information up to higher levels quickly, begin to show them what's possible with the logging aggregation tool and how we use it. And that concludes it. Thank you for joining me today. Appreciate it. See if we have any questions.
So when you log down to Sumo Logic in AWS, we also use Sumo Logic in AWS. So I understand the reason, but can you point out your reasons? Why did you choose Sumo Logic as for log monitoring and AWS for your platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you recall, and I'll go back, these are highlighted, but I'll speak in more detail about them. Where we go? Okay, so the three big bullet points that we wanted to hit were ease of use, cost, and the relationship at the time. And it's funny, but you really can't lessen the relationship bullet here, at least for me personally, right? I want responsiveness from a vendor like this, especially when I'm going into a proof of concept or a decision phase, right? So if you're open and honest with them and you get that back from them quickly, that's important to me as a decision maker. So that was one of my biggest areas of input into that proof of concept. And technically, at the time, Splunk's offering, and I can't say what it is today because we chose Sumo and I haven't looked back, but Splunk's offering at the time in AWS was really a managed EC2 instance, which, as I'm beginning to decouple and build my infrastructures and introduce auto-scaling groups and stuff, I want to know that my logging vendor is going to be right there, if not ahead of me. And I knew Sumo was, and Splunk was not. So that was a big factor for us.
So basically, what do you do with those .local files? I'm a bit interested in that.
What's that? The
So
.local?
basically, the .local files. Do you just delete them, or do you upload them somewhere else? Or what?
In the Docker containers?
Yes, the .local.
Yeah, the .local. So they get recycled every time, right? So they're there for the developer to see, like that may be where they want, a higher level of logging that they don't care if it goes to Sumo or not. It's not important to the application. And eventually they just get recycled. So they would be handled by standard logging facets or standard logging things, right? Which is like, write for a day, zip it, create another one the next day.
Okay, so just delete it after a day or so, something of that sort. Okay.
Yeah, the whole point of that is really just, I only care about in this particular context, right?
Okay.
And the reason that format exists is so they can get everything that they need when they're developing and then not worry about it. Because if you put it on the development team to change that from, or to make any change as you move from development to UAT or staging to production, human beings are human beings, right? You just end up forgetting stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. So one more question on top of that. So basically the dot local file. So if I'm a developer, so I just need to go to the machine, grep on those files if you need to debug.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. You need access. So
Okay.
so really, it's about the lower environments.
Okay. So one more question. So what was that graph, the usage graph? So how did you get that?
How did I get that
Yes,
usage graph?
exactly.
So interesting question, because Sumo changed how they measure ingestion, right? Not so long ago, like over the summer, I believe.
Yeah.
Change the way that the data usage volume.
That's right. Yeah, you changed that, and that created a bit of a interesting question for me. So I talked to Ben, the guy who coordinated me speaking, and I said, hey, look, I want to just show our volume on these two accounts, and it was a bit of a back and forth, but he went into a Sumo backend system and retrieved that data for me. That wasn't necessarily at my fingertips. I didn't create those graphs, so I cheated a little bit. Yeah.
So I really appreciated that you used the Sumo dashboard, showed us really good examples of it. I'm curious, so once you got the information around number of errors and so forth, how did you funnel that back to the customer success organization and or people who actually interacted with the end customers that you had to reach out to notify them of potential outages or issues that you uncovered?
Yeah, so for that, right, when you see a spike of a certain type of error, it becomes less about Sumo logic and more about your internal business process, right? So if we spike certain types of errors that we know are important to us, we do use Sumo to kick off the alerts and the emails. So a lot of the dashboards that you saw created there also have in the background these saved searches that do email alerting. And so those email alerts from Sumo Logic are the ones that kick off that internal business process to make people aware, to restart a server, to do something like that.
Individuals have access to Sumo Logic, or do you have an external alert that's sent via email? Is that the
Talking
approach?
customers, or are you talking internal?
I'm talking to internal.
Internal. So as we've operationalized our relationship with Sumo Logic so much, we've moved from, like I used to administer all these accounts, right? But now we've moved to the SSO model of authentication. So now Sumo's tied directly to our AD Forest. So now, everybody's got access. Yeah.
I don't want to hog the mic. Anyone else have a question? Well, fantastic. I think we learned a lot about the CI/CD process at Pitney Bowes. I think we're hearing a lot of customers sort of trying to shorten their release cycles, and
For sure.
I think the things you're doing, things other customers have expressed, certainly leads to a better customer experience. So, thank you so much, Brett.
Thank you.
Appreciate the talk, and Brett will be off stage here for a couple of minutes to answer whatever questions you have.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.